In the summer of 1971, I attended ROTC Advanced Camp at Fort Lewis, Washington. I finished first in my company, battalion, and brigade, and was named the outstanding cadet of the entire camp session. My mother and father were sitting in the bleachers during the graduation parade. Dad later told me that after I had been called forward yet again to receive another award, a parent somewhere behind him muttered, "Probably some general's kid." I wasn't, but those awards were about to produce returns I could not yet imagine. Back at Berkeley, Colonel Wyndham Bammer called me into his office. As Cadet Brigade Commander, I met with Colonel Bammer frequently. This meeting was different. He told me that my Fort Lewis record and the graduate record exam scores had qualified me for an Army top 5% fellowship. The Army would send me to graduate school for 2 years, covering tuition, books, fees, while continuing my military pay. Until that moment, graduate school had hardly entered my mind. Now an entire future had opened up in front of me, and I had decisions to make. 2 years later, while serving at Fort Ord, the decision could no longer be postponed. I applied to Notre Dame and USC and was accepted by both. Notre Dame offered prestige, Catholic tradition, a powerful alumni network, and football. USC offered a strong program, workable Army arrangements, familiar Southern California, and 2 sets of grandparents nearby for the baby we were expecting. The choice was close, and either way, I expected to see great football. In the end, I chose USC. At the time, it seemed like a practical decision. Only much later did I understand how completely it would redirect my life. My first semester at USC did not begin triumphantly. Professor Lee returned our first quantitative business analysis exam, and at the top of mine was a letter I had never received before. F. "I've never gotten an F on a test," I told Professor Lee. "You did here," he said. He agreed to tutor me and sent me to a Saturday remedial course known as Bonehead Calculus. So while much of Southern California was headed toward the Coliseum on Saturday afternoons, I sat in a classroom within hearing distance of the crowds. With Professor Lee's help and a great deal of work, I eventually earned an A. But that's another story. By late November, I was finally free on Saturday. And this was not just any Saturday. USC was playing Notre Dame. I managed to get 2 tickets and invited my father. Dad had earned his bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees from the University of Pittsburgh, but in his heart, he had always been a Notre Dame fan. I suspect it went back to his youth when Notre Dame seemed to stand at the summit of college football. So we entered the Coliseum supporting opposite teams. On opposite sidelines stood 2 legendary coaches, USC's John McKay and Notre Dame's Ara Parseghian. Our seats were high in the end zone. They were not what anybody would call premium football seats. I was also surprised by the number of nuns scattered throughout the stadium. Nuns from several orders wearing different habits, but united in their loyalty to the Fighting Irish. They were about to have a very enjoyable first half. Notre Dame dominated USC and built a 24-0 lead. A USC touchdown just before halftime made it 24-6, a score that scarcely reflected how one-sided the game had been. Some USC fans began heading for the exits, perhaps hoping to beat the freeway traffic. Dad remained characteristically reserved, but I knew he had to be quietly satisfied. I had wanted the afternoon to be special. Instead, I had given him a one-sided game and bad seats. "Dad," I said, "I'm sorry this is such a lousy game." He gave me one of those quiet fatherly responses that meant it did not really matter. Then I apologized for the seats. Well, we agreed to stay. At that moment, neither of us knew the seats I had just called lousy were about to become the best seats in the Coliseum. I don't know exactly what John McKay said in the USC locker room. Whatever it was, the Trojans came out looking different. They seemed quicker, sharper, more certain, but they were still 18 points behind. The second kickoff was coming directly toward our end zone. The ball sailed toward us and then dropped into the end zone. Anthony Davis, number 28, fielded it. A player down by 18 points might have allowed the ball to become a touchback and begun the second half from the 20-yard line. Davis did not. He looked downfield, and from our high end zone seats, I could see what he saw. Having played offensive line in high school, I watched the blockers create angles, seal off defenders, and open a lane. From our seats, the field unfolded like a diagram. The seats I had apologized for gave us a perfect view. Davis accelerated through the opening. The crowd rose with him. From our end zone, we watched him run away from us and toward the far goal line. The Coliseum came alive. Dad and I exchanged a look. Neither of us said much. We did not have to. Something had changed. The score still favored Notre Dame, but the game no longer belonged to the Irish. USC scored again and again. What had begun as a catastrophe became an avalanche in the opposite direction. Anthony Davis scored 4 touchdowns and a 2-point conversion, 2 more points than Notre Dame had scored all afternoon. USC scored 49 unanswered points and won 55-24. But that's not primarily how I remember the afternoon. I remember sitting beside my father as disbelief slowly became excitement. I remember the looks we exchanged as the impossible became likely and then inevitable. And I remember the two of us retelling the story afterward, and then telling it all over again when we got home. I thought that remarkable afternoon might stand alone, but USC students could buy Rose Bowl tickets, and in those days, the Trojans were frequent visitors to Pasadena. I bought 2, and I invited Dad again. On New Year's Day, we joined 106,719 other people at the Rose Bowl. Once again, it was USC against one of the nation's great powers. Once again, Dad and I were there together. Across from John McKay stood another legendary coach, Woody Hayes. In a little more than a month, I had seen McKay face both Ara Parseghian and Woody Hayes. Ohio State was formidable. The Buckeyes had Archie Griffin, who had just won the Heisman Trophy, and would become the only player ever to win it twice. Ohio State was favored, and for much of the afternoon, the Buckeyes looked the better team. USC's defense fought to contain Griffin and keep the game within reach. Late in the fourth quarter, Ohio State led 17-10. Once again, Dad and I were watching USC from the edge of defeat. With about 2 minutes remaining, Pat Hayden led USC down the field and threw a touchdown pass to J.K. McKay. The score was 17-16. Now McKay faced a choice. He could kick the extra point and accept a tie, or he could attempt a 2-point conversion and risk losing everything. McKay chose to go for 2. Hayden took the snap and found Shelton Diggs. The conversion was good. USC led 18-17. That was the final score. For the second time in more than a month, Dad and I watched USC emerge from what appeared to be defeat. In the pre-playoff era, the national championship also depended on what happened elsewhere. Notre Dame then defeated Alabama in the Orange Bowl, helping make USC the national champion. The team my father loved had lost to the team I had chosen, and then helped crown it. Colonel Bammer could not have known where his offer would lead. I certainly didn't. It led me to graduate school. It led me to USC. It led me home. And for one unforgettable football season, it gave my father and me something rare. 2 enormous public spectacles that became, in memory, quiet and deeply personal moments between father and son. At the time, I thought Dad and I had witnessed 2 extraordinary victories. Only later did I understand what I had really been given. My father and I shared many experiences before that season. There had been scouting activities, family outings, times with my brother, other scouts, and people we loved. Those were good experiences, but these 2 games were different. For once, it was just Dad and me, along with 106,719 of our closest friends.